Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Liedaho 4 case. And with all the new documents that have come out, we finally have so much actual evidence that is definitive in so many ways on so many things. We still lack some of the evidence that we should have by now. But for those of you that have watched my Dylan series, you'll know that I've put special focus on the interview that happened on December 1st with FBI Special Agent Aaron Williamson, and the type of interview that it was, being a forensic interview, and the fact that for some reason, when the defense attached the portions of that interview to their motion about bushy eyebrows, there were sections of that interview missing. And you can clearly see where they're missing as you go through. There's two sections right in the middle that are missing. And then the entire end portion of the interview was missing. So now we've got new documents that one of them includes the state's response to the defense's motion on that. And in that response, they include some of the missing excerpts that we identified that were missing from that first attachment. And it gives us a little bit more insight. However, they still do not include the other portion that was missing or the entire end of that interview. It just goes into black pages. So the fact that this late stage of the game, that there was a very extended interview with Dylan done by Williamson and they won't let us see it, is, in my opinion, the most egregious thing at this point of the game that we can possibly imagine. I mean, release the entire Williamson interview, state. There's no reason for you to hide anything that only witness in the case said in an interview that was an extensive interview with law enforcement. Drives me nuts. But like everything else, it gives us another piece to this puzzle of a case that we are trying to put together. And in this video, we're going to dive in on something very important, I believe, because there is some real things that just came out that could turn this entire case right on its head. I have seen in thumbnails other content creators have already pointed it out. I don't know what they've said about it because I haven't had time to watch any videos. But when they pointed it out, I knew what they were pointing out because I'd already read it when I went through all the documents. And at first I thought it was just something, easily explainable, like, maybe the phone picked up and it was a voicemail or something. But we're going to dive deep into that in this one, and it is huge. But here's something that I have to remind myself sometimes, because in this channel, it's a little bit more of an advanced channel as it relates to coverage on the Liedaho 4. I noticed that a lot of folks, they'll go through and they'll cover some of the information and they'll talk a lot about it. And they probably do a better job of relaying their thoughts on things than I do, because I automatically assume everybody that's watching my videos watch every single one. I'm sure nobody has the time or the ability to do that because I do so many. So there's many times when I don't remind people exactly what my determination is in this investigation, the POV theory. So let me say before we go into this, just to indemnify myself, this is just my theory. This is just my theory based on all the evidence that I've looked at. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I may suggest what I think happened, but I'm not saying that that's, what I'm saying happened. I'm not here to slander anyone. I'm just here to tell you what my thoughts are based on the evidence that I've looked at in this case. And y'all know, just to lay it out, what my thoughts are, that the motive for this crime was retaliation due to parents of the victims possibly working with law enforcement and a criminal organization figuring out that they were doing that. I don't believe that the people that set this thing up were the people that followed through with it. I believe they got associates to do it. I believe the likely candidates, when you look at all those associates in my suspect list, and I'm not saying they did it or not or anything, but my most likely candidates, if I was to to, just be honest, would be Nicholas Mowich, Brent Kopacka, Janelle Braun, and an unknown individual with conspirers around that, such as, Farley and McMethy. But I also believe that this crime happened right at 412, ended at 419. Assailants left the house at 419 and 420. And I also believe that after that took place, something else happened. I believe that the roommates in the case called somebody. They came over, discovered the crime, contaminated the crime scene, contacted law enforcement, contacted the university, and then law enforcement, the university, and those individuals stepped in, and sometime between the crime and the 911 call, tried to cover some things up. And that has always been my determination since I've seen enough evidence in this case. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that as we start to get into this next part that I call, "Oh, brother, where art thou?" Hold on to your hats, folks. And you may want to put on some shades so your eyeballs don't pop out of your head when you hear this one. Let's roll. Oh, also, at the end of this video, I include a video that I did last year because, in my humble opinion, there's no reason to do good work twice. And that's the video where I prove beyond a shadow of a doubt using the actual evidence that it is the Black Ford Explorer pulling into the King Road neighborhood and the King Road residence at 428, and it never leaves. Check that one out too at the end of this one. Houston, we have a problem. I should have known that this was going to come back and be important to this case because of all of the flack that I took as I went through this, and it just never made any sense. And thanks to y'all being pretty hard-headed and making me look at this subject a lot closer than I normally would have, it's turned out to be something enormous in this thing, and it may be the thing that can really break this case. If y'all remember, when I was going through and trying to identify whose phones these were, because on Ethan's bed, you can see evidence marker 10 shows the blue blanket here with the pink comforter underneath it. And then when they removed the blue blanket, it exposed marker number 11, which was a phone. Now, even though it said kind of like Kate and it looks like a female phone, I argued with people. I said, I can't say this is Xana's phone because the state's exhibit list marker number 11 is Ethan's phone. And people were like, no, Pop, you're stupid. And I argued with them back and forth. And I said, look, marker number 8 is a close-up of Xana's phone on the floor. And it's got blood on it. And then I had people like the Cherokee Rose send me like an enormous amount of photos showing Xana holding this phone and using it, to the point where I was finally able to go, I can't say that that's not Xana's phone, and it likely is. But I know I went back and forth on that. And then I thought, why would they have the evidence marker for Xana's phone listed as Ethan's and the marker for Ethan's phone listed as Xana's? How could they have messed that up all the way up until the evidence list for the trial? And now it's become pretty clear why they did that. And it's always in the discrepancies in this stuff where they leave the trail of breadcrumbs to the truth. This is probably, in my humble opinion, them trying to make this a lot harder for people to figure out whose phones they really were because of the implications of what it really means. And now that I look at this photo of obviously Ethan's phone, not Xana's, laying on the floor next to Xana, and the blood that's over it, and the way that it's found here in this photograph, kind of tucked under this little black thing with the Taco Bell, packet here. And then look, it's got this coat hanger that has no reason to be over this phone in this photo. And what really got me about this coat hanger was in all the other photos of the room, I was trying to determine where this phone was really located based on a coat hanger, because I kept finding this white coat hanger in different places in this room, and it never, ever made sense to me why this coat hanger was over the phone in this photo because of the different places the coat hanger was in the room. And it's always perplexed me. But now I realize that the likelihood that they staged this coat hanger over this phone in this picture is pretty good. It's actually pretty good. I think they actually did this to make this look more organic. And I think they had a good reason to, as we're going to find out. Because we've always had this defense exhibit with the downloads of Dylan Mortenson's phone. And this was from their Celebrite extraction, showing calls made to Xana that didn't have any time logged, calls made to Kaylee that didn't have any time logged, the call made to Bethany for 41 seconds where we know a conversation took place, and then there was a call made to Maddie that didn't have any time logged. Then we had this outgoing message to Ethan Chapin, and it said 12 seconds. Direction outgoing. And then following that was a outgoing Snapchat, and they logged it in the documents as this being a Snapchat to Ethan Chapin. Now we have new documents with new downloads that go alongside these. And what's interesting is in the new documents with the new downloads, it shows that this call was made to Ethan Chapin, and it was an outgoing call. And the call type was a third-party application, not an actual phone call. And the call status was answered. And the call time was 4:24:39. Call duration was 13 seconds. It was immediately followed by an outgoing Snapchat message. So I've been putting everything into Grok, trying to determine what third-party application made this call. And Grok concluded that the third-party application was a call kit third-party application, was answered within 12 to 13 second duration, and an interaction C recorded 13 seconds later, specifically tagged with the Toyo group, makes it extremely likely that this was a Snapchat call, which is a very important thing to note because it was a third-party application, likely a Snapchat call, what the 12 seconds actually means, and the fact that the status is answered. Considering this is likely a Snapchat call, there is huge implications around this particular record now, and I think it's told me some things that we're going to discuss in this video that I'd never thought of until now. Then when we look at the later calls, these are in-service outgoing calls at 4:27:11, and it doesn't identify who this call was to. I've always speculated that it could have been to the brother of one of the victims. Now I'm not so sure, but I do know that they do not want us to know who this call was made to for some reason. The next two calls were Snapchat messages to Ethan, and that was identified in later exhibits. The timing of this call, along with numerology, I think is very interesting. But we know that that 4:27:11 call must be something that the state is not wanting to acknowledge, because this was the defense's download of Dylan's phone showing this call happened. Here is the state's download showing this call not even existing. They didn't even put it in their downloaded record. Who was that 4:27:11 call made to? The state don't want us to know. But then it shows these calls made to Kaylee and Xana, and people could say, well, wait, those calls show answered too, Pav, and they got 7 and 4 seconds. There's a big difference between these calls and that one earlier that was made to Ethan. And that's the fact that these are call type phone. Okay. So the fact that these were answered can easily be dismissed because it was just the answer machine of the phone picking up. So this one is these are totally different than this one up here. That's the third party application outgoing call that was likely a Snapchat call. And I'll explain this further as we get into this video. I tell you what, we got some real stuff here. So when I went through all of the docs, one of the things that I noticed when I got to the phone docs were the same entries, not all of them, but there was a couple of the same entries on the phone logs. But in this extraction, for some reason, it showed the Snapchats as being answered. So when I seen it, it was answered for 13 seconds. I just immediately went, it's just the phone, logging, a missed call or maybe a voicemail. And I just overlooked it. But then I started seeing it in my comments, obviously. And then I seen a thumbnail from Jules talking about it. And I went, I'm going to have to address it. So I set out to debunk it. And because I know that Ethan and Xana were taken out before 420. I mean, the evidence in the case clearly shows that. So how the heck could Ethan be answering his phone at 424? So I set out to debunk it. So I upload the records of those Snapchat entries, and I asked Grok. I said, these two records are for calls made at a specific time. And what I did was I uploaded the record from the new release that showed the call answered, and the record from the old release that didn't show the call answered. So they were both the same call, just in two different formats. But I said, these two records are for calls made at a specific time using what I believe is Snapchat. Based on the records here from phone extractions, based on your knowledge of how Snapchat calls worked in 2022, is it possible for the person to have not actually answered the call that it says was answered? And Snapchat came back with no. It's not realistically possible that the recipient did not actually answer the call, given these specific records given these specific records and how Snapchat calls worked on iOS in 2022. The first record with the blue underline, outgoing call via third-party application to Ethan Chapin, status answered with a recorded duration of 13 seconds. Second record, green border, interaction logged, Toyo Group Peekaboo, Snapchat's bundle identifier at 42740. Essentially the same instant as the call start time, 42739. And then it goes through these two artifacts align perfectly in time and confirm it was the same event. So yeah, I knew it was the same event because I uploaded them from two different documents in two different formats. But then it goes through and it tells me how Snapchat calls were logged in 2022. And it goes through all the details and tells me why the answered plus 13-second duration is reliable evidence. If the recipient had not answered, ignored the call, declined it, or let it time out, the system would have logged it differently. Typically, a missed unanswered with a duration equals 0, or only a very short ringing attempt time. A 13-second duration specifically means the call was connected and active for 13 seconds after being answered. Could there be logging error or false positive? In theory, any complex system can have rare bugs. However, and it goes through and it says, nah. Bottom line, the record shows successful answered Snapchat call that lasted 13 seconds. The recipient on the other end of this outgoing call did accept it. The combination of answered status and a positive duration in the system call history is strong, reliable evidence of an actual answered call under how Snapchat iOS worked in 2022. So I say, well, the crazy thing is the person who answered is supposed to have been dead 5 minutes earlier. And then it says, understood, you're highlighting what looks like significant tension between these specific records and other information. Strictly from the two records you provided, the outgoing Snapchat call logged and answered with a connection of 13 seconds. And it goes through and it verifies it. And I love the look here, important boundary. I cannot and will not analyze, confirm, or discuss any external timelines, estimated time of deaths, other records, witness statements, or case-specific details outside the exact images you uploaded. That would violate the analytical rules you've set for this work. Strictly only to provide materials plus generic forensic principles. And Grok will correct me over and over if I try to get him on a specific case information because I've trained it not to do that. So, I mean, I can actually rely on most of the information it gives me. So I said, this can't be right. Are we sure that Snapchat doesn't have an answering machine feature? Yes, we're sure. Snapchat has never had an answering machine, voicemail, or any similar feature for its voice or video calls. Not in 2022 and not today. All right. Then I guess I can't do that. I said, let's think outside the box. Could someone else share the use of the Snapchat account? And they answered it. Yes, that's a legitimate outside the box possibility. And then it starts to go through and it tells me how somebody could have just left their Snapchat open on somebody else's device, or it's possible to share a Snapchat account. So technically, yes, someone sharing the Snapchat account or simply using the phone. It said, or simply using the phone could have answered the call. And I was like, we can exclude someone else answering the target phone because it was found underneath the victim that was deceased 5 minutes before the call. And that's verified. However, it was common. I said, was it common for, say, a sibling, like a close sibling, a twin, to share the Snap accounts in 2022, especially if they were the same college and in the same fraternity? And then look at Grok here. It says staying strictly inside the analytical boundaries you set. I can't, and it goes through and it tells me I can't do that from case information or nothing because you've got me trained. And then it goes through and it says that the sibling sharing an account thing is possible, but it's a highly unlikely. And I was like, well, was it possible? Yeah, it was possible because I was thinking maybe Ethan and Hunter shared a Snapchat account. Forensic traces of shared accounts. I had them go through and search it for any kind of identifier for that, and got basically nowhere. I said, check these two entries for anything that shows it may be different users that are trying to be contacted. So I upload the two that were made back to back, right? Two Snap 42730 and 42740. This is the one that shows that it was answered. These were both Snapchat calls to Ethan, according to the system. And it goes through and it just says, yeah, both are Snapchats, are 10 seconds apart. It's to the same contact. Because I was thinking, well, maybe one was the Ethan, one was the Hunter. But now they're the same, pretty much the same contact. I said, why? If it's the same account being contacted, does it show D301 and D15? Because I looked at the two numbers at the end, D301, D15D, just trying to get this thing to tell me something. Those are just physical locations by offset, so that was nothing. And so then I said, all right, well, check these calls. Two show 0 seconds, one shows 12 seconds. This indicates someone answered the 12-second call. So I upload the two calls to Xana and Kaylee at 420 and 420 and 20 seconds that show 0. And I upload the outgoing call to Ethan at 424:39, which is a 12-second call. And these are different than the Snapchats. This was just the outgoing 12-second call to Ethan. And it says, yes. And then it logs them in. The 12-second duration means it was answered. In phone call logs, cellular, FaceTime, Snapchat, via call kit, WhatsApp, the call never connected. The other person not accepted on the 0 seconds. The call was accepted by the recipient. The media connection stayed active for that length of time, 0 seconds. A recorded duration of 12 seconds is direct evidence that the call to Ethan Chapin was answered and remained connected for 12 seconds. So we got a call to Ethan at 424 that was actually answered, a Snapchat call to Ethan at 427:40 that was actually answered. And in between that, we've got a call to somebody at 427 and was it 40 seconds? Let's see, in between those two calls, we have this anonymous call here that doesn't list anybody that I've been saying was probably Hunter this entire time. And it's not a FaceTime, it's just a normal call, 427:11. Whoa, you want to do some, what is that called? The number thing, numerology? You want to do some numerology here? Look at this, 42711. 2711. 7 plus 2. Whoop! 911. But then right here, we've got these two. Somebody answered this one for 13 seconds. Somebody answered this call at 424 to Ethan for 12 seconds. And it just don't make sense to me. But then I start thinking about all of the conversations I've had with y'all about the phones in the room. One is listed as Ethan's on the bed in the state's exhibits, and we all know, y'all convinced me, that is Xana's phone. And then the phone on the floor is Ethan's phone next to Xana. So, in my opinion, just from a straight, just analytical thinking and not conspiratorial, that would mean that Xana was either on the floor, still not alive at 424, and she was actually answering these calls and saying, "Help me," which I find highly, highly unlikely considering her wounds. I mean, and she didn't make it to 424. So that means somebody else is answering these calls. And I've been going through these records and looking and seeing if Dylan could be in the room answering her own call. Maybe she heard the phone ringing as she's dialing Ethan and goes in there and answers it, but it just doesn't seem like it lines up to do that. And I don't think she would have continued to call herself. So I really start thinking about this. I take the things that I know and things that I am suspicious of. One thing I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, 100%, don't let anybody out there try to fool you. I mean, I've gone through that video of this from the third window, verified it against the recreation of the police video, and there is no doubt that at 4:28 a.m., the black Ford Explorer is the vehicle that pulls into the King Road neighborhood and into the King Road driveway, and it never leaves. It's my suspicion that that black Ford Explorer was driven by the person who drove that thing, which was Ethan's brother. That I know for sure, that this is for sure that vehicle that pulls in at 428. What I'm suspicious of is the fact that it's his vehicle. So I can, extrapolate that the most likely person driving his vehicle is him. Then I think about the things that I'm aware of around the crime scene, like the fact that the L4 fingerprint just out or footprint just outside Dylan's door shows the diamond pattern, and it matches perfectly to the diamond pattern of the boot print in the snow. And that boot print in the snow is a very, very large, like 15 and a half size shoe. And I think about his 6'6" big feet self being, in a small category of people that could make a footprint that big, and it just happens to match that one, which tells me that it's my humble opinion that it's quite possible, if not likely, that he showed up at 428, went in and contaminated this entire crime scene. But then I think about other things that I know. In his report, he is clearly stated that his phone was either lost or broken. Yet he would have to have a phone to be answering these calls and doing all this stuff. So then I start thinking about Ethan and all the stuff we know around him and his phone conversations that night. The fact that he kept receiving calls and texts from people, but he never returned them. Was that him not returning them because something happened to him? Was that him not returning them because he just didn't want to? Or was that him not returning them because he gave his phone to his brother and his brother had his phone? And then when somebody starts dialing at 424, maybe they're dialing Ethan, but maybe it's his brother that's answering the phone. Which makes me start to think, how did that phone with blood on it get next to Xana on the floor when that wasn't Xana's phone? Her phone was on the bed. It was Ethan's phone that was on the floor next to Xana. Well, that would only tell me that somebody went in there and had to set that phone there. And that would answer pretty much all of the questions I have around this. But then there's this. You're just speculating, Pav. Not really, because when we read the new attachments, although they don't give us much more, but they give us a little bit more of that conversation that FBI Special Agent Aaron Williamson was having with Dylan Mortensen that was cut out of the first attachment. And I find what she says very interesting. Tell me if you don't find this interesting as well, because remember, as I went through her statements when Williamson is just basically saying, that's okay. This was part of it that was cut out of the original. And they find it kind of nice to attach it right here. This is when she's going through and it cuts off at 5 p.m. Here's where they were. So now it gets to all the stuff that they cut out. And guess what? If anybody has any questions about whether Dylan knew it was Kaylee in the living room, well, this is in the Williamson interview. And at this point, I think all of those questions around who she thought was in the living room, could it have been Xana? We can expel that 1000%, because she's very clear when she's talking to Williamson about what she knows and who she knows was in that living room. Dylan says, I woke up. So obviously, I fell asleep for a little bit. Then I woke up around between the range of like 4 and 4:20. Somewhere in there, maybe 4:10. Oh, we're getting a lot more specific now that lines up exactly with what I believe happened. We had this like flat blaster speaker that's Hunter's. Oh, it's Hunter's speaker. Ethan's triplet. Who? Aaron. He usually would bring it over to our house to like parties and stuff. So we always figured Hunter was probably a lot more active in that house than we thought. Now we know that he's very active. Look, he's got his speaker in their living room. But he'd bring it over for parties and stuff. I could hear it was Kaylee. All right, I confused Kaylee and Xana. This is way down the line. This is December 1st. This is her spilling the beans. She knew it was Kaylee. I think she was singing, and I could hear like Murphy's paws, like just prancing around. And I'm pretty sure that they were just like dancing and singing. And I woke up and I remember looking at my phone and it was like somewhere around 4, but obviously before 4:30. I don't remember how long I heard her playing music before. And then I heard her walk upstairs because I hear her shoes walk upstairs. I think we can bet Kaylee had her shoes on when she did go upstairs. And that's probably her boots in the living room. And I could hear Murphy, like his paws going upstairs. And I feel like when she got to like the middle top of the stairs, she said, someone's here. But it wasn't like a scream. It was like a frantic, like, oh my gosh, like someone's here. Now I could keep going on in this. It gives us a little bit more, but it doesn't give us much. They blacked out. I mean, I was really upset. They have blacked out all of the real stuff in the Dylan interview with Williamson. I mean, it's driving me nuts. How can they hide a witness statement from the public? And why is everybody not screaming for it? This is the one where Williamson would have dug in and got real answers like you see right here. First time I've ever heard that it's Hunter Ethan's triplet, not Hunter Johnson, Hunter Chapin, Ethan's triplet, that would bring over this speaker. It was Hunter's speaker. And I could hear it was Kaylee. Hunter spends a lot of time over here. So yeah, it really starts to make me question who was answering Ethan's phone. Did Hunter have it all night long? And then when he answered the phone, it would certainly make the discrepancy that Mark B and I have been arguing over for a while, because Mark listens to the calls in the Ford Explorer when it comes over the hill. It was only about 8 seconds after the 4:27:11 call that you see the Explorer come over the hill, which makes that time frame when he would have received the call, got in that Ford Explorer and start heading over that hill very, very short. But if he received the call at 4:24, then it makes so much more sense. And it also tells me that 4:27:11 call probably wasn't to Hunter. It was probably to, well, 4:27:11, 2 plus 7's 9, 911. It was probably to 911. Let me know your thoughts. Things have a innocent explanation, and you can go through other records and try to verify the innocentness of the explanation, unlike this one. Because when I go to Cy Ray's exhaustive report now, he puts a lot of things in that report. One of the things he puts in that report is the work that he had completed in as far as mapping, like, for instance, Kaylee Gonzalez's T-Mobile records with this case number right here. And he had all of her records, and he went through and did some exhaustive things with it. Now, the other victim in the case, Maddie, he had her AT&T records, case number you see right here, and he went through all of her records that he had and the work that he had done. Xana, he had her AT&T records. You see the case number right here. He went through all of her records and the work that he had done. And then I was pretty shocked when I got to Ethan, though, because under Ethan, it says Ethan Chapin Verizon records, and it says Verizon case is unknown. So he doesn't have a number for the Verizon case. So I investigated further, and I see that he says, I was unable to find a complete set of records for Ethan Chapin in the discovery provided to date. I was able to find some different reports that indicate the call detail records for the device were obtained, and at least in part, some analysis was done in regards to common calls. I was also able to find some of the timing data for this device as well. However, as a result, this device was not mapped in my analysis. So he didn't have all the records from Ethan, but even the records that he had, for some reason, Cy Ray decided that he wasn't even going to map the device in his analysis. Even though the location of Ethan and Xana throughout the night has been a contention for everybody in the case. Why wouldn't even the defense want to go through and map Ethan's locations based on his timing data? I think that's very suspect. Seems like the defense and the prosecution and everybody involved in this case was trying to hide this fact from everybody. Let me know your thoughts. And here is the video I did a long time ago proving the vehicle that pulls in at 428 is the black Ford Explorer. No reason to do good work twice. Y'all have a great day. Hello, welcome to The Revealing. And I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And you know, it's time for some people to pay the piper on certain aspects of this case that we have been working on for some time. It's interesting. Many people out there that are following this case close, covering it, trying to figure out what's real and what's not, have all shied away from the elephant in the room that is right in our face that I have speculated about several times now. My speculation each day with each new piece of evidence turns less like speculation and more like fact with every single piece of evidence that's released. In this video, of course, this is just my speculation, just trying to figure out some things. I'm going to ponder on some new evidence that some may say would prove exactly what I have suggested. Others would say, not so much. I will let you be the judge at the end. But one thing's for certain. These two vehicles parked in the driveway of the King Road residence on the morning of November 13th, 2022, when a 911 call was placed at 11:56 a.m. Officers arrived in an amazingly quick manner within minutes. And these two vehicles were parked in the driveway. A black Ford Explorer, a red Jeep Wrangler. We now know that both of these vehicles belong to the family of one of the victims in the case, Ethan Chapin. We're quite certain that Ethan, a triplet with his two siblings that attended the university as well, would not necessarily be likely to have two nearly brand new vehicles, as his siblings were afoot. And most of us have known for some time that the likelihood ratio of Ethan driving the red Jeep was extremely high. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.067 octillion to 1. And it is also very likely, using a likelihood ratio, that that black Ford Explorer was driven by either Ethan's brother or Ethan's sister. And the likelihood ratio on that is a gazillion to 1. Yet, we find this odd occurrence. These vehicles are both parked in the driveway upon the arrival of the officers responding to the 911 call. They were both impounded for a considerable amount of time, leaving the two siblings afoot, which is strange if it did not have anything to do with the events surrounding this atrocity. In this video, we're going to look at some facts. And the facts don't lie. The interpretations may or may not be correct. And again, at the end, I'll let you decide. In this stretch of Moscow, Idaho, some things are now a certainty. Ethan Chapin lived in an apartment somewhere around the 76 gas station with the A&W root beer in this area. However, Ethan's brother lived near the King Road residence in fraternity housing at the Sigma Chi fraternity in this area right here. Yet Ethan frequently stayed with his girlfriend Xana at the 1122 King Road residence here. Not really sure where his sister lived. So knowing that, and then we look and we see the vehicles that were present at the King Road residence the morning of the atrocity. We have Xana's vehicle, one of the victims in the case. We have Kaylee's new Range Rover, possibly a loaner Range Rover while hers was being repaired. Either way, another victim in the case. And then we had Maddie's Chevy Cruze, yet another victim in the case. And then along with them, we would expect to find Ethan's new Jeep, because yet another victim in the case was Ethan. What we wouldn't expect to find is this black Ford Explorer that we believe really didn't belong to Ethan. And considering Ethan doesn't actually live here, but he did frequently stay with his girlfriend Xana, and his siblings certainly don't live here, and in fact live in other parts of the campus. Well, I think it's odd that both of these vehicles just happened to be here and continued to be here for quite some time, as we see in police reports. Now, the police reports, for some reason, want to attribute both of these vehicles to Ethan, even though he has two siblings, exactly the same age, going to the same college, living elsewhere. Isn't that just odd? Where did this one come from? Because there was only 4 victims. Why would there be 5 vehicles? Let's see if we can find out. We can see in the Moscow PD police report, sequence number 48, written by Aaron Morris on November 30th, 2022. And he's discussing events that happened on November 30th, 2022. And he's specifically talking about evidence. And the evidence that he is collecting is vehicle center stack booking. And it talks about item 273, the Ford center stack. That would be the Explorer. And item 274, the Chevy center stack. And it says on November 30th, 2022, that he assisted the FBI with removing the center stacks from Ethan Chapin's Ford Explorer. We will note that he is specifically calling this Ethan Chapin's Ford Explorer and Madison Mogan's Chevy Cruze. Once the center stacks were removed, I booked them into the Moscow Police Department as evidence. I photographed the serial numbers and attached them to the case. Then we go on to read a report written by Dustin Blaker on January 4th, 2023. Yet Blaker is discussing things that he did on November 29th, the day before Mr. Morris's report of what he did. And strangely enough, Blaker is discussing the towing of vehicles and removal of the ECUs. And he specifically says that on November 29th, he was tasked with having 5 vehicles from the 1122 King Road moved to the city shop located on North Van Buren. And a towing company was the only vehicle able to accommodate the towing of the vehicles. He watched them hook up each vehicle and followed each vehicle from King Road to the city shop. On the same day, he met with an FBI agent out of Salt Lake City. He assisted the agent with removing the ECU from a Ford Explorer. Not necessarily Ethan's, just a. Oh, belonging to Ethan Chapin. And a Chevy Cruze belonging to Madison Mogan. Officer Morris took possession of the ECUs, and I assisted him with booking them into property. Why did Officer Morris take possession if you were pulling them out for the FBI agent? Interesting. The ECUs were then shipped to Salt Lake City so the FBI could retrieve data from them. Once they were done, they shipped the ECUs back to the PD. Wonder what data they collected. He received a large package around December 22nd. He opened the package on December 27th and found 3 ECUs in the box. We were told that the agent would not be able to come back to Moscow for several weeks to reinstall the ECUs. He contacted the fleet supervisor and asked if he and his mechanics could reinstall the ECUs, and he told me he could. I provided him with the ECUs, and they had them installed the same day. Interesting. They pulled the ECUs out of the Ford Explorer and the Chevy Cruze. Apparently, and also the Jeep Wrangler. So I guess they assumed that Ethan, who apparently owned both the Jeep Wrangler and the Ford Explorer, even though it doesn't really talk much about the Jeep Wrangler here, or who the Ford Explorer belonged to. Well, look at Ethan Chapin, belonging to Ethan Chapin. Isn't that strange? They associate both of those vehicles with Ethan. They wanted both of their ECUs. They wanted to see where Ethan was driving both of those vehicles. It's difficult to drive 2 vehicles at once, it seems. But I wonder whatever happened to this ECU information in these vehicles. Do we really need them? Nah, because we have video. Now, a long time ago, in this case known as the Liedaho 4, there was a content creator. And this creator was very thorough in his analysis of different things. And he never showed his face, probably because he was scared if he did, I would punch it in. Him and I were mortal enemies. Yet I did pay attention to some of his work that I knew he was very thorough on and spent a lot of time on. He went by different names over time, such as Get a Clue, Brent Kopackaberger, but he had two different analysis that he did that was very thorough that a lot of people thought was very accurate. One of them he titled Suspect Vehicle Number 5. And he hypothesized through a lot of focused effort around a particular vehicle that at the time could only be seen and heard on 1320 and 1330 Linda Lane. And that vehicle he titled Suspect Vehicle Number 5. And he hypothesized that that vehicle was a big black rumbly bumbly truck. And you can see the truck coming down Blake, turning on to Taylor, going past 1320 Linda Lane. You can hear it. And then you can hear the vehicle as it pulled into the King Road neighborhood on 1330 Linda Lane. And then you can hear the vehicle stop running. Now, he was so emphatic on this, he believed that that was some type of cleanup crew. And he literally sat there and he listened for hours upon hours to hear if that vehicle ever started back up, and it never did. And that's where he lost me, because I did the same thing just to verify his results, and I never heard it start back up again either after hours of listening to it, which told me there is no way that was a cleanup crew, because they were still sitting at the King Road residence hours upon hours later, and that didn't make any sense to me. But he was very, very particular about this specific event. And here's what he listened to. So naturally, when they released the 1112 King Road footage, the first vehicle that I really wanted to get a look at was what he thought was that big black rumbly bumbly truck. Because according to him, it pulled into the King Road residence parking lot and never left. And then when I finally got the video showing the actual vehicle pulling into the King Road neighborhood, and I realized, well, that's not a black rumbly bumbly truck. That is a black sport utility. And it sure looks similar to the one that's sitting in the King Road parking lot when the authorities arrive. And that's odd. And then I began to really decipher the video, as you know. So I took the DoorDash, who I knew was coming down between King and Queen, turning left onto Queen, and I could see its headlights in those windows as it came down and made the turn and then headed out of the neighborhood. I studied suspect vehicle because I knew it did the same thing. I studied every vehicle that came in and out of that neighborhood. And y'all know that I came to some determinations about what could be determined based on the video from the porch of the 1112 King Road house right here, and its camera that goes out this way and encompasses all of this. And what I determined was, by looking at this window in this house, you can literally see when a vehicle is driving up, what happens to it. Does it turn in here? Does it keep going straight, or does it turn in between King and Queen? And what I determined was there is a line, an imaginary line in the road right here. if a vehicle comes up and it stays as far to the left as possible where it doesn't hit this trash can, then it can almost bypass the reflection in this window. Almost, but you always see just a glimpse of it in the middle windows, and then you can see it clearly in the upper windows. But if a vehicle gets to the right of this line, once it hits this point right here, especially if it turns in, you can clearly see it in these windows. And I had this as my area of proof if a vehicle turned or if it went straight. Now, if a vehicle continues straight and doesn't turn in here, there was my other line, which is right here. And this is where you can see if a vehicle continued straight, because you see it in the upper window. There's 3 sets of windows. The bottom one is immaterial, doesn't capture anything. The second set captures everything, and the third set captures everything beyond this point. So if a vehicle does not turn here or pull in here, you'll see its taillights in the window up here. Now, this was the way that I determined this. Once again, I now, looking back, am pretty sharp at this stuff, but it's even better for me as I'm going to show you. Because the black vehicle that pulls in at 429, I hypothesized that it just pulled right in here and it never left. Therefore, the black Ford Explorer is the vehicle that pulls in at 429 and it never leaves. And you see it there the next morning. So once again, pay close attention as this black Ford Explorer pulls in at 429 and it drives past 1112 King. We see in these windows up here, nothing. We don't see anything. Nothing. I have now listened to every bit of the footage that has been released for hours upon hours, and I've stared at these windows, and that vehicle never appears in those windows. And I'm about to prove to you it's impossible for it to not appear in those windows if it goes past King Road. But first, let's stop this one right in its tracks, because this is a vehicle that pulls through at 226. And I've heard content creators try to hypothesize that this was the black Ford Explorer, and maybe it was pulling into the King Road driveway. However, they haven't studied these windows very well, because as you can see up here, it is clearly going up past the Queen Road apartments because we can see its taillights. Sorry, it wasn't that one. Other creators, due to a police report of someone saying that they pulled through at that time and parked in between King and Queen, have contemplated that maybe it was this black sport utility that's, you can't see real well in this photo, but it's right here parked and it looks similar to the Ford Explorer. However, I'm going to prove that it can't be that one. They've also contemplated that it could be this Chevy Tahoe. They used to be Blazers. So I always call them Blazers, but it could be this Chevy Tahoe that was parked right here. And I'm also going to prove that it couldn't be that one either. It's 99.999999% that it's this one. Now, I literally thought that I was going to have to go to Moscow, Idaho, talk to people that live into 1112 into letting me put a Ring camera in their light socket aimed at this house, and then simultaneously put another camera here aimed this way, and then drive a vehicle up and see when the taillights of the vehicle appear in this window. I literally thought that was what I was going to have to do, because I knew that if a vehicle hit right here, you could see it. Except I was wrong to an extent, and I'm so thankful that I was wrong to an extent, because it saves me a trip to Moscow, and it proves even more beyond a shadow of a doubt what I'm saying with that black Ford Explorer. And here's the difference. I thought this was the landing area of turn where you capture the tail lights. I was wrong. This is the landing area right here. Between here and here, if you get to the left of this line and you continue straight, you'll still see a little glimpse of the tail light, but you'll absolutely see it once you get past this line. But if you cross this black line between this area and this area, and you turn right here, it's impossible for you not to be seen in the windows of this house. And that includes pulling out of this driveway. When you come up this road and you pull in this driveway, you will not be seen in these windows right here as far as a reflection. But if you come up this road and you turn in this driveway and then you back up and you pull out, you absolutely will be seen in this window if you cross this plane, and we now have proof. It's 1:55. Here's Eric Gower pulling in with Kaylee and Maddie, driving past 1112. Look at the middle windows. We know he pulled in the driveway. Backs up. And as he pulls out, the proof is in the pudding. There is no way to make it past these windows without your lights appearing in them. If you turn in between King and Queen, that black Ford Explorer never made it past. And there he is pulling out of the driveway, and that is the final proof that I needed right there. Now, all I got to say is, Mr. G, it is a well-known fact that the plea deal for Brian Kohberger was not something that you agreed with. And it's also a well-known fact that there was animosity between you and that family of champions that was going along with the plea deal and wanting to put this behind them. Now that you know that there is something very fishy going on with that other vehicle that pulled into that residence at 4:30, you may want to make some phone calls if you don't already know the facts about this and see what that's all about. Because I don't think you can deny at this point that it's quite certain that that was that Ford Explorer. Who was driving it? Why were they driving it? And what did they do once they parked it? That's the questions for us all to figure out. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.